welcome. Welcome to Red Star Talks with Roger McKenzie. In case you hadn't guessed, I am Roger McKenzie, and it's written on the screen there. And I have the great pleasure to be joined by my friend and comrade and in peace campaigning and all of that, Sophie Bolt, the General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Sophie, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here.
Pleasure's all mine, mate. Before we get cracking, let me just ask everybody who's taken the time to come on and watch this podcast. Thank you, first of all. The next thing is, please press that like button and subscribe to the podcast. We need as many people as possible to be subscribing to this podcast. This is a Red Star Media podcast, which is produced by Manifesto Press and supported by the Morning Star newspaper, which some of you may know have the honour of being the international editor for as well. But what we do need is for as many people as possible to be watching and listening and really acting on the sort of things that we talk about in these podcasts. So please do subscribe, press that like button, share it with as many people as you can as well. So with that, Sophie, again, thank you so much for coming on. Let's start. I mean, what I often do on these podcasts, Sophie, is I start with a little bit of background on who I'm talking to, because I should say, before we go any further, I should fess up to everybody as well that Sophie is the General Secretary of CND, but I have the great honour as well of being the Vice President, one of the Vice Presidents of CND as well, something that frankly, I never thought would come my way, I have to tell you. So it's one of the great honours of my life to be Vice President of such a fantastic and important organisation. But I mean, to start with, Sophie, can you say a little bit about your background and a little bit about how you came into the peace movement?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of got politicised at university, and it took me a while to get to university. You know, I kind of didn't go straight from school, college, what have you. So I sort of took my time. But when I did eventually decide that I wanted to go to university, it was a big deal for me. And I was coming in just on the cusp of the new Labour government. So that was sort of 1998. And I found myself in a situation where I was the last group of people who were getting a maintenance grant and didn't have to pay fees. And for me, going to university, it was a really big deal. I remember kind of feeling really anxious. Can I justify getting into £5,000 worth of debt? Am I worth it? Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was like, I really want. Anyway, so I did. And so then when I was sort of confronted with the fact that we had a Labour government that was, potentially going to be, imposing £15,000 worth of debt on students at that time, I was like, this is terrible. This is like so awful. And I just think of all those people who will be having those same, thoughts that I had, and they will be saying, I just can't afford to go to university. So for me, that was my kind of moment of, I've got to get involved in this. So it was a massive learning curve because I had not been political before then. So it was a massive learning curve on so many levels. But from that that sort of social kind of economic justice, quite quickly you then kind of make the links around kind of international justice, don't you? And so from that, it wasn't long before I was like, getting involved in the campaign to sort of stop the war on Iraq. And I think
can I just take you back a little bit?
Totally.
So because I'm like you, Sophie, because I actually didn't go to university full time. I was a kind of part-time MA student is how I did it. And I remember what it felt like for me as a working class lad, kind of nobody ever told me that universities were for me, basically. And I didn't have the qualifications to do it anyway. But I remember what it felt like going into one of these institutions. Which university did you go to, first of all?
Goldsmiths.
Goldsmiths. And what did you study?
English and theatre.
Ah, that would explain quite a lot about your style. Absolutely. Ah, right. Excellent. Excellent
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
No, no, that's fantastic. Um,
So I did a non-traditional route as well. So I didn't do A levels, well, I did a kind of an A level at evening class, but then I did evening class really. I like did a BTEC and finance or something. Somebody at work said you should do more qualifications. So I kind of did that. And being back in that learning environment, I just felt this is, I really, really enjoyed it. And I was like, I need to get back into properly learning and educating myself, and that's a good thing, and I can do it, and those opportunities are there, you know?
so you got so you go to university and Blair charges students the world for going
Mm,
there,
mm,
basically.
mm, mm.
But then you're kind of on the cusp there, as you were kind of just starting to explain, of um, you know Blair taking the country into an unwanted conflict in Iraq.
Mm.
So, but still, lots of people didn't make the choice to get involved in the peace movement. They might have marched, but they didn't kind of get right into it. So, what do you think was the real kind of spur for you to get involved?
I think it was, as I say, kind of getting politicized around free education and understanding how important it is to sort of organize and how it makes you so much more effective. That's the only way that you're gonna sort of change things, isn't it? So I was already kind of organizing, around free education as a student. I'd made loads of sort of like links with people, in my university, but kind of nationally. And so it just seemed, you know, obvious that I need to be getting involved in an organized sort of effective way to try and stop war. Um, so yeah, and sort of CND was something that I came into contact with through other kind of students, um, and we sort of set up a student CND network, to get like more students involved. And as I say, then we were confronted with the horror of dodgy dossiers. Do you know what I mean? Like this, and also this massive whipping up of racism. I think
Hmm.
that was the other thing that was, so shocking and like so serious. I had kind of got involved in anti-racism campaigning at university. The murder of Stephen Lawrence was, just down the road from where I was studying. So, these was very sort of serious situations. And of course, as I say, the massive whipping up of racism against the Muslim community was part and parcel of that war drive, wasn't it? So on the one hand, it was like we were being obviously, lied to about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction, this massive rush to go to war. And at the same time, you have this really serious kind of, vile, attempt to try and portray Islam as uniquely reactionary and like on the verge of invading us. It was this whole clash of civilizations. I'm sure you remember this.
Hmm.
That like literally Islam was armed to the teeth and was going to destroy us. And of course it was a total opposite, wasn't it? It was a justification for the US, like the biggest military power in the world. Do you know what I mean? To carry out shock and awe, and like murder, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians. So, um, it was absolutely kind of shocking, really, the scale of that. Um, but also it was incredibly empowering. You know, I, um, I sort of came into contact with like these really, really dynamic young Muslim women, you know what I mean, who were organizing huge, coaches coming down from Birmingham. We're doing all the comms, we're doing all the press work, you know what I mean? So this whole idea about, Muslim women being, very sort of, shy and retiring and all that sort of stuff. It just obviously complete crap. So, things like that I found like incredibly inspiring, incredibly empowering, and just being on that massive demonstration, February 2020. 2003 was just,
Yeah, yeah, I remember going on that as
yeah,
well,
yeah.
and it was just, I mean, like you, I remember
Extraordinary.
being just inspired by some of those people who were
Yeah,
on
yeah.
there, and again, like we're seeing around Gaza, I think, and those demonstrations that are
Mm-mm.
taking place, huge demonstrations taking place, people who haven't ever particularly thought of going out and marching before, whole families going out and
Mm.
raising their voices. You know, there's an old African American, I think it's their kind of the Black National Anthem, I think they call it in the States, which is about lifting every voice.
Mm.
And I mean, that seemed to me to be what happened during 2003, but
Mm.
also
Mm.
all the kind of big protests that have taken place where you've seen whole families coming up and who don't know what, you know, these marches are quite scary, you know, get all these revolutionary types on there. And actually, when they look around, they see these people who's just like them and they get inspired by that and they get
Mm.
more
Mm.
active. And I've always thought that was a kind of alchemy,
Yeah,
really,
totally. I
you
mean,
know?
absolutely magical moments. I mean, I remember like now talking about the, the Palestine coalition against the genocide. Like, I started out doing a lot of stewarding for those protests, which again was like, they were so huge. I remember the sort of the November 2024 one when Suella Braverman was trying to get it banned. We feel like, we're kind of back in that territory again, aren't we? And so you had like just huge numbers of people in Hyde Park that we were sort of trying to sort of filter through and keeping people safe so they weren't getting like run over by the traffic. The police, you know what I mean? This whole thing where they refuse to close the road, so you're having to be kind of traffic wardens. Anyway, so that sort of stuff again, very formative, and you make these really amazing bonds with like activists you've never met before, but you're kind of having to sort of sort this out. But also I remember something that was really lovely. I remember I had kind of megaphone that was sort of trying to tell people where to go, but also chanting as well. And there was like you say, there was like a family of like a young Muslim children, and they were chanting, and I just gave the megaphone to this little boy who just took up the chant. Do you know what I mean? He just took it up, and he was kind of leading the chant, and stuff like that is just so beautiful and magical. You know what I mean? And everybody around was kind of beaming. Everybody was really, just loving that. So stuff like that, and like that stays with you, doesn't it?
Oh,
So
absolutely. And that youngster will never forget
yeah,
something
yeah,
like that either. You know, and hopefully that person is still involved
yeah,
somehow
totally.
and getting involved and raise it and continuing to raise their voice. And even if they're not doing that in the peace movement, then hopefully doing that at
Mm,
work, you know, just
yeah,
raising
yeah,
their voices and not allowing themselves to be kind of trampled on. And that for me is one of the transformations that you can see and makes, you know, the kind of years that I spent in the movement really
mm,
worthwhile. You know, when
yeah,
somebody, I remember, you know, people have come up to me and said, "Oh yeah, yeah, we met years ago," or "I heard you speak," or we're at the same thing, and this happened and that happened, and here I am. I'm still
yeah,
involved, and I just think that's great. You know,
yeah, yeah, totally.
really makes me happy.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got more involved in CND and eventually went on to the national committee. And were you vice chair or vice chair? I think were you?
Yeah, yeah, no, I've been vice chair. I was also chair of London region for some time. But yeah, also, yeah, on the kind of the officer team, one of the vice
Yeah,
chairs. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So now, and it feels like I'm jumping, but it's really not because it's kind of endless wars that we're dealing with,
Mm,
really.
mm,
Um, I mean, it feels to me like we're in a kind of really precarious position at the moment again.
mm,
The old doomsday clock
mm.
is continually clicking
Yeah, yeah,
more and more towards catastrophe,
yeah,
really.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, do you want to talk us through how CND kind of sees the current position that we're in terms of the possibility of um, a nuclear catastrophe actually taking place?
Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely increasing. The risks are accelerating. And I think that's for a number of reasons. I think I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have a world order, which is based on, a country having overwhelming kind of military might and sort of throwing that weight around in order to kind of maintain its dominance. So that's the US, and we're in a situation where the US is sort of struggling to maintain that dominance, and I think is much more reckless. And I think we're totally seeing this with the Trump administration in terms of not only kind of threatening so-called enemies, you know what I mean, and like illegally bombing Iran, has come back to that, but also threatening so-called allies, so like NATO member states. So this threat to take Greenland, Canada. I mean, it's really, so you've got a situation where it's really clear that the world is far more dangerous. That we've got like a US administration that could drag us all, into war. But you've got a situation where all the nuclear weapon states are increasing their nuclear weapons, are modernizing their nuclear weapons, are expanding their nuclear weapons. So that's kind of going on, and that's kind of only accelerating. And then within that, you're all the kind of arms control treaties, the kind of the frameworks that have been in place for decades that are there to try and sort of, limit or control, how those nuclear weapons are developed or used. All of that is kind of crumbling. So, for instance, the really sort of significant treaty, which is called the START Treaty, and that's between Russia and the US. And why is that so significant? Because they have like 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. So there are about 12,000, nuclear weapons in the world. 90% of them are held by Russia and the US. And this treaty is now like expired. Yeah. And that's, really, really significant. So we're kind of arguing that has got to be, restarted. So restart, start. That's kind of what we're arguing. We've had, protests at the Russian embassy. We've got protests at the US embassy coming up, but really about, getting people to understand that these treaties are really significant and they need to be, they need to kind of be reestablished, but also why are they falling away? And they're falling away because countries are just refusing to abide by international law. They're kind of ripping up these treaties, they're ripping up international law. And I think the genocide of the Palestinian people goes to the heart of that, in terms of the sort of the conduct that you're seeing in terms of wars. The fact that like a genocide is being perpetrated against, you know, a whole population in Gaza, and the US has completely aided militarily, financially, politically, and our own government, has done the same. Lots of Western governments have just totally backed a genocide. Absolutely shocking. So it just kind of shows you the horrific situation and the increased dangers that there are in the world, I think. And then you add on to that the threat of nuclear weapons being used. I mean, it is really terrifying. And I feel that I think that, the Ukraine war has been a wake-up call in terms of, whole new generation of people understanding, that nuclear war is real. It's a real threat. But I think also in terms of like this latest thing, where Trump like literally posted on social media that he was going to wipe out Iran as an entire civilization. And I remember looking at this going, so this is Trump like threatening to use nuclear weapons on Iran. Like he's doing that on social media. Like this is the world that we live in now. And I think because he is so erratic, because he is so reckless, because he's totally backed a genocide, you had to think, could you really do this? I mean, it's really, really horrifying. So I think, the world is definitely in a much more dangerous place. Certainly for CND, it's about how can we kind of challenge this narrative that like nuclear weapons, we need them. Do you know what I mean? They keep us safe and all of this. And that gets you into this whole kind of hypocrisy around nuclear weapons, that there are nuclear weapon states that must have them, like Britain and the US. We must have our nuclear weapons. They're absolutely central to our security. You know, we're going to fight tooth and nail to keep our nuclear weapons. And then there are other countries that are not allowed to have nuclear weapons and never should have nuclear weapons, and we will bomb them illegally, and we will even, this is like British nuclear policy, is that it believes that it has a right to use its nuclear weapons against countries that don't have nuclear weapons if they are not abiding by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? You know, which is what the British government is failing to do, you know. So, you know, we're in a situation where nuclear weapon states basically are threatening non-nuclear weapon states that they are going to use them. So that's, you know, total a breach of this fundamental agreement that was sort of set up in the 70s, you know, that was supposed to kind of keep the peace. But, you know, it shows that it's that's completely gone out the window. And as I say, we're now in a situation where there's you know, the real sort of risks of nuclear weapons being used either between Russia and NATO over Ukraine, or, you know, potentially, you know, Israel, the US. It's very difficult to say. So we are in a very difficult, very dangerous situation, and I think, you know, we can unpack that further in terms of what's kind of driving that. But certainly from CND's point of view, it's really exposing these lies about nuclear weapons keep us safe. You know, that's absolutely fundamental.
I mean, this whole kind of atmosphere at the moment reminds me greatly of the early 80s when I was really starting to get involved. Um, it was the whole kind of Reagan Thatcher era. And I mean, many of us felt at the time that it was just really a matter of time before there was a nuclear war. So what was, I think, protect and survive and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And we really did feel that. And I'm feeling that way again, that, you know, I'm always optimistic, you know, but it's that same sort of atmosphere that you can just get somebody who feels that they can win, because that seems to me to be one of the things that's floating around again, that there's this real belief that that the US has, that they can, and I've seen some of the kind of documents around it, that they believe that they could actually win a nuclear conflict, and then it's a matter of who kills how many more people than the other, and I see Trump is now talking about this Golden Dome business again. But also I've just written a piece for the Morning Star about a new weapons test that Putin has been celebrating, really, for Russia, which he says is claims to be the most powerful weapon ever. And that the US has nothing like it. And that seems to me to be saying, all right, so we've got that now, and the US clearly will, you know, is almost kind of being put in a position, not that it needs to be pushed at all or even nudged, that they'll want to renew, you know, kind of their nuclear arsenal as well, and that's for me that the whole epitome of proliferation really is that one says that, well, we've got the most powerful weapon ever, and Trump, who wants to be the most powerful and the biggest of the bigliest whatever, he will go on and say, well, we need that now, and they're going to take money out of public services, so the little that they already put into public services in the US, and put that even more into nuclear weapons. I mean, the trillions and trillions that they already put into the military industrial complex, and then it just goes on, and that's what scares me, is that it's also the impact that it has on the rest of the society while they're continuing to pump money into the military industrial complex, and public services are dying. And then we give the as public services die, then it allows the far right to come in, it seems to me, and then make the argument, well, you see, public services are dying because it's these immigrants and all of that, and the stop the boats and all of that nonsense coming up, and that creates a ground for that to take place. And so it's worrying to me as well. But what is it that we can do, really, to stand up against this stuff?
Well, I think because the threats are growing, more and more people are prepared to, be counted. You know what I mean? We are finding that, more and more people are joining us precisely because they are so frightened about what's going on. And vast majority of people understand that nuclear weapons don't keep us safe. You know what I mean? That they just hold the entire world to ransom. And I think that Trump's threat, for instance, was just, it kind of crossed the line in a way. And I think more and more people are like, oh my gosh, are we kind of at that point again? So I think vast majority of people do not think that they keep them safe, that we need to kind of get rid of them. And I think for us, what's really critical is sort of showing how tangible the threat of nuclear weapons are. It's not just a question of them being used that puts us at risk, but it's also like the everyday, in terms of like the nuclear bases that we have in Britain, the fact that these leak like radioactivity into the waters, that then people breathe in that radioactive vapor. You've got all of that going on. You've got the fact that we have nuclear weapons here in Britain. How dangerous is that? We've got sort of nuclear capable jets, flying in and out of Britain. So you've got all of that going on. But like you say, we also have, because so hundreds of billions of pounds are being literally wasted on these nuclear weapons, it is totally determining our economic policy. So like you say, in terms of, it's got George Robertson like intervening here, the sort of former defense secretary under Blair, sort of saying, we've got to be cutting welfare because we've got to further increase military spending. But people don't want that. You know what I mean? And like, I think whilst there's been a lot of rhetoric from Starmer, that we're continuing to arm up and all this warmongering, in actual fact, from 2024 to 2025, military spending for Britain went down by 2%, and that's because of all our campaigning. That's because predominantly Labour MPs, were putting loads of pressure on the government to say, you cannot be cutting, public services any further. This is so unpopular. And so there has been this kind of shift. And that's why you've got people like Robertson coming in to say, no, you've got to be, really, pushing that. And so I think that's why in terms of what happens with the leadership election when it comes, what is going to be the alternative? Because I think there's real concerns around, people like Wes Streeting, who totally supports what Robertson's saying. And, I don't think there's basically sort of much movement there. But I think that totally shows that public opinion, public protest, lobbying, it totally, it does make a real difference. So I think that's absolutely critical. But also for us, like you say, militarism, war, it is not it's not going to solve any of the problems that we face. In fact, it's only going to worsen all of those crises. So it's massively going to accelerate, climate breakdown. It's only, driving austerity, and like you say, it's massively increasing the threat of the far right. And CND, we totally understand why it's so important to be part of, a wider movement, why we have to sort of build alliances on all these issues. So that's why we're part of the Together Alliance, against the rise of the far right. We are part of the demonstration on Saturday, the commemorating the Nakba, but we're in this, horrifying situation where, a day that should be to commemorate, this absolutely catastrophic creation of the State of Israel, and the impact that had on the Palestinian people. We've been forced by the police into moving out of, of the centre of London, because that's been given over to, fascists and the far right. And it's absolutely, unbelievable that that's happening. When you have peaceful protests against the genocide being sort of, deprioritized, and fascists with a clear recorded, history of violence are given the sort of the centre of London in a situation where, reform is on the rise. It's really really very, very serious and very, very dangerous. So for us, a big part of our campaigning is around kind of nurses not nukes, books not bombs, basically, really kind of challenging all the lies about how militarism, will, you know, bring us prosperity. It's going to kickstart our economy. You know what I mean? We have made a real point of organising protests at, British sort of nuclear bases. Like, for instance, we've been to Barrow-in-Furness, where they make the nuclear submarines. We've been to Devonport in Plymouth, where they like do the maintenance for these nuclear submarines. The level of poverty in those communities is really, really high. You can just see the social deprivation when you go to these towns. So it just shows it's a complete lie. Do you know what I mean? That, communities are kind of, benefiting from all this money. It's not, we know this, it's going into the pockets of, shareholders of the arms industry. That's where it's going. It's not, and in fact, it's only making these communities like much poorer. And they're the ones like on the front line, who are taking the iodine tablets, yeah, in case of, a nuclear emergency. You know what I mean? This is the reality of having an economy that's kind of based on war, militarism, and nuclear weapons. That's the reality of it, So it's really important to us that we are kind of showing, as I say, this kind of tangible, the impact of nuclear weapons on a everyday basis. It's not that like, there's some threat in the future. Every day they threaten, our communities, and they are dragging us further into poverty. And as I say, like all they're doing is they're just making the crises worse. So
yeah, I think it was Tony Benn years ago who said that we just continually fighting the same battles, repeating the same battles, because I remember. Again, back in the 80s, one of the great things that CND was known for and is still doing are these campaigns outside these so-called US bases, which I think is, for me, one of the great things that CND does is to expose what is actually going on at these bases that, as we used to call it back in those days, that Britain we're an aircraft carrier for the US, and that really hasn't changed. They might have altered a little bit the balance of it over a period, but we're back again to that situation. It seems to me,
totally.
where the brilliant campaigning that CND, and should say as well, some of the other peace campaigning groups also do, is to expose what's going on. But that whole thing about protest is under threat as well. I mean, so the Labour government is now saying things like, well, you can't have these repeats kind of protests, all of it, which is bizarre to me. That who's going to, who's to decide when a campaign is ended, not the campaigners, I mean, so the government decides, well, you've had your little fun now, basically. It seems to me it's the sort of thing that they're saying. You've had a little fun, you've all spent your money, and you've marched around London or wherever, and we've heard you now. You can go away now, and we'll carry on doing what we're doing, but you've had your little fun. I mean, I have never heard, I don't think even Thatcher proposed that, unless I missed something, but even the most draconian, kind of Tory, I don't remember Thatcher even presenting something. I mean, to me, this is a massive threat to our civil liberties. I mean, I know because we've spoken about before that CND is also on that same sort of page of that this is something that we need to
Of
raise
course.
our voices against.
Yeah, totally. Because I mean, you know, what's proved to be effective around getting nuclear weapons out of Britain, for instance, has been protester bases, like you say, non-violent direct action, very, very insistent, determined, continuous, like Greenham, you know what I mean? 12 years. That's a lot of, protesting. But got that base closed down. The same with Lake and Heath. You know what I mean? So yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I feel that what's going on now is just a complete kind of moral bankruptcy of this government. It's they've totally lost the argument. And this is, I mean, it's not just around the Palestine movement. It's not just around silencing us, um, on genocide, because that's primarily what it's focused on now, is that they just want to try and silence any kind of opposition to the ongoing genocide. But we've seen it around climate action. Do you know what I mean? We've seen it previously around people who campaigned around sort of animal rights. You know what I mean? So we know that this is part of a much kind of wider attack, but they're kind of using it now around the Palestine coalition. But I mean, it's absolutely obscene that the idea that if you protest in one place, and also this legislation, so it's this whole thing around cumulative impact and how we've seen it in terms of the Palestine coalition. So CND is part of one of the partners in the Palestine coalition, which is obviously led by the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Is throughout the whole over 2-year period of these demonstrations, we've just been having more and more conditions imposed on the demonstrations, and the argument as it's gone along has been that we are there's a cumulative impact on communities in London, and the police have argued that it's the Jewish community that is kind of being disproportionately kind of impacted. And now we've had this really, I think, like shocking intervention by Mark Rowley, the Met Police Commissioner, saying that as organisers of these Palestine demonstrations, it has been our intention to try and march past synagogues, which has never, ever, ever been our intention. Why on earth would we be targeting a synagogue? This is all about the Israeli, government. This is all about the British government. It's all about those who are complicit in genocide. It's got nothing to do with synagogues and with the Jewish community. And in fact, we have thousands and thousands of Jewish people on our demonstrations, and we are absolutely scrupulous and absolutely clear that we never conflate people's support for Israel with them being Jewish. It's a total opposite, so it's real terrible sort of smear campaign that's going on, and very, very dangerous, I think, when you've got somebody like the Met Police Commissioner saying things like this. So we've had to have a really, really big pushback on that. But that's really what's going on, is this attempt to say that our demonstrations, our peaceful demonstrations, are in some way threatening, where there's no evidence at all. So you've got that going on. And then you've got this attempt to kind of criminalize us, so we've had loads and loads of arrests around, people like standing in the wrong bit of London. Do you know what I mean? Like outside of conditions that, were imposed, may not have been imposed. Do you know what I mean? People are being arrested for that and then being like criminalized. And this is being presented as we're some kind of threat when, as I say, we are peacefully protesting. We're trying to sort of take flowers and lay them, at the BBC. Do you know what I mean? We're being presented as like this sort of threat to society, when of course we're not. You know what I mean? And if you want to live in a really thriving, healthy democracy, then protest has got to be central to that. Freedom of speech, protest has got to be central to that. So it is very concerning. But I think what I'd say is people need to, follow what's going on. They need to challenge all these lies. It's really, really important to challenge all these lies. But also you've got to come out and protest. Do you know what I mean? We've got to kind of keep on protesting, because we don't have any other choice, do we? If our governments are breaking international law, they're committing, complicit in war crimes, we have to stand up and we have to call that out, and we've got to, keep the pressure on.
Absolutely. We've got, I mean, part of the pressure, I guess, is going to be shown through the international peace conference that's coming up. I mean, what are the kind of hopes for what that is going to achieve? Because we've had lots of conferences. Is this going to be just another one?
Well, I think it's very significant because it's about kind of bringing together the European peace movement, in Britain, in a situation where we know there's like this massive, rearmament taking place across Europe. Um, and like it's being posed as like, we can't depend on, the US anymore, and like we're gonna have to work it out for ourselves. So therefore, we've got to, massively spend like hundreds of billions of euros and pounds on all this weapons of war. You've got a situation where like in Germany they're pushing towards conscription. At the moment, it's kind of voluntary, but like there's huge opposition to all of this. You have huge strikes in Italy. Like there's been like huge protests in Germany against the threats of conscription. So, and massive demonstrations. So it's like, what can we learn from Europe? How can we really galvanize that so that we can have an even sort of stronger movement? We need to be having a much kind of higher level of protest and opposition here. We also need to learn from what's going on there, because it's coming here in terms of the rise of the far right and all these attacks, as I say, around trying to coerce especially young people into joining the army, and like this is some kind of like great career for our young people, like we've got to sort of expose all of that. So it's about really kind of bringing that movement together and learning from it and being galvanized and sort of strengthened and increasing our kind of activism.
So we'll put all the details of the international conference in the kind of show notes and invite as many people as possible
Yes.
to support it and so on, because I do think it's important that we get a really good representation there. And when I said at the beginning there that, oh, is this just another conference? I mean, I know it's not, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
It is really, really important that I think, as you say, that we really galvanize people around some of the challenges that we face, and use that, I think, as a kind of springboard to tackle a kind of the wider international kind of dimension to this as well. I mean, something we've spoken about before, which is about the importance of how we can engage with the global South around issues of nuclear. The military industrial complex, basically, and the way that kids are being used to kind of dig with their bare hands to get uranium or
Yes.
cobalt and all that sort of stuff, so that
Mm, mm,
we can all live in the
mm,
relative wealth that we do.
mm.
But actually, it's the contribution that those things make to nuclear weapons and other weapons as well, so-called conventional weapons, that I think is something that I know, and I'm very proud of CND for doing this. Is we're raising this on the agenda more and more about the need to further internationalize the peace movement, and making sure that those issues of the complete exploitation of the global South is brought to the fore. I think for me, it's one of the great things that CND is doing at the
Mm,
minute,
mm.
because I think it absolutely ties in with our campaigns to say nuclear weapons, no thanks.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
like the old badge used to say.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I
totally.
still think is right. So Sophie, I mean, how can people join CND? That's the
Well,
thing.
I mean, the easiest thing is for them to join online. I mean, literally, you go to our website and there's a join page so you can join. So that way, I mean, we'll be on the demonstration on Saturday. Just come to our stall. We've got a really amazing, like bright yellow and black
Yeah.
stall. So, you can't miss us. So you can join up there. They'll if you get involved in a local group, you can join up that way. But yeah, that's probably the easiest way, I'd say.
Right. And so can I just say to everybody who's watching this to take notice of what Sophie's just said, right? Because I think if one of the most important things that we can do at the moment is to build the peace movement. And for me, one of the most vital parts of that peace movement is the campaign for nuclear disarmament. So please, everybody, if you're not already a member of CND, please join. But don't just join on paper, because as with this podcast, what we say to everybody is we're not just asking you to watch me have a yap with some of my mates, basically, on these podcasts. What I want you to do is to listen to what we're saying and then go away and do something. We're about turning theory into practice, and about really going out and organising and trying to do stuff and to get things done. And that's really why we do this podcast, and it's really why CND exists. It's not just about so some of us can go and give some nice speeches somewhere. It's about actually changing the world from this really exploitative position that we're in, that is so dangerous to the future of the planet. And at some point, I'm going to ask you to come back on, Sophie, because I want to chat with you about nuclear weapons and the environment and climate change and all of that as well at some point.
Brilliant.
Because it never ever gets talked about.
Yeah.
Actually the biggest contributor to the climate emergency is the military, and we just never get to talk about. So at some point, Sophie, I'm going to have you back on, and we'll chat about that. So how can people follow what you do as well?
Well, we are all over the social medias, so I would say that's the best way. So Instagram, Facebook, we're also on, basically all the platforms. So you can follow us that way, CND. So just check us out. But also, if you want to sort of get our newsletter, get our emails, you can just email us, and we'll send those through to you. So yeah, and as I say, like, always do come and see us. Like, we're at all the demos, so do come along and see us and chat and find out what we're doing, and and do follow us and help share all our content, because as Roger says, now more than ever, we've got to get rid of these nuclear weapons. It's absolutely critical. So yeah, and we can. I mean, that's the whole thing. I think the message has got to be hopeful, because it is public protest. It is ordinary people like us. Do you know what I mean? Like, lobbying MPs, like signing letters, going on protests, persuading other people that changes the world, that forces political leaders to step back from the brink, the nuclear brink. It forces political leaders to get rid of nuclear weapons. It has done in the past, and it will do again. So we have to do that. Yeah, and we can, and we will.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sophie. I know how busy you are, so I'm really great that you could come on. And as I said, we can have you back on at some point, because there's a load more that we need to talk about. Can I thank you all for watching this podcast? As I said at the beginning, this is a Red Star Media podcast which is produced by Manifesto Press and supported by the Morning Star newspaper, the world's only English language socialist daily newspaper. But also, please press the like button if you haven't already done it. Subscribe to the podcast, share it widely, get other people to watch it in the future and get them to share it too. But the main thing is, as I just mentioned, the main thing is you don't just watch these podcasts, please, as grateful as I am that you do that, but we want you to go out and do stuff. We want people to go out and organise, because we really, time is short now, I think. The catastrophe that Sophie has just outlined, I think we really need to take seriously. And the only way things are going to change is not going to be what somebody else does on our behalf. It's always about what we're prepared to do. And as it was once said, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. There's nobody else who's going to do this stuff for us. It's always down to us it's up to us to put pressure on people. And the great thing to remember about the whole thing around nuclear weapons, I think, is that the success that CND and others led during the 1980s that stopped this catastrophe, and I don't think I've put that too strongly. It was the people that organized, that put pressure on politicians, that put pressure on institutions, that really made the difference. And I think we can do that again. So please get involved. Please support CND and do what you can to stop us from getting nearer and nearer to this catastrophe. Sophie, my friend, thank you so much. And thanks for all the fantastic work that you do with CND. You're a real inspiration, mate. Really are.
Oh, thank you.
So
Right
much.
back at you.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. Thank you all for listening. See you soon. Take care. Good luck and stay safe, everyone.